All right, good morning. I'm here with Scott Woodhill, and we're here to talk about. Um, Scott is a management consultant focused on talent and talent optimization, and in our work with emerging growth companies, talent and talent optimization is right up there among the most pressing and omnipresent challenges that founders are dealing with, finding the right people and then getting them on the same page and getting them to perform and so forth. And so so in this conversation, I wanted to Scott and I wanted to dive into some of the particular challenges in the talent arena that Scott's got expertise in. So Scott, why don't we start with, if you could just share a little bit about your professional background and your current role, and how you help companies and leaders with their talent optimization. We can get a sense of kind of what you do day in and day out, and then dive into the particular topic of this call, which is the challenge of uh, having technical performers, that is, people who are proficient in a technical sense, um, in their particular area of specialization, and how to transition them, or really the nature of the transition from that technical role to more of a leadership role in companies. I've seen in my clients that can be a real challenge, and so we're going to talk more about that a little bit later on. But Scott, why don't I turn it over to you so you can give people a sense of your experience and expertise, and how you help.
Sure. Well, good morning. And so I'm Scott Woodhill, Senior Director of Talent Optimization at Adroit Business Solutions. We, just high level real quick, we offer an assessment tool, the Predictive Index, to help with hiring and retention, as well as a full suite of training. A lot of it, most of it around soft skills, communication, connection, even though the topics are things like performance management, leadership, etc. My business merged with Adroit. Before, I was only doing those trainings. And over the past years, I discovered that a lot of the time, the need for leadership / management training, so people going into any type of leadership position, was the most needed. And we'll get into why that's the case. I got a master's degree in psychology at the University of Santa Monica and became a mediator. I left my career in IT consulting because I had no heart in that anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to help people connect, became a mediator, facilitated dialogue with the LAPD and communities they serve, as well as the LA County Sheriff's Department. And then I can't even say how it happened, moved into workforce training and development just through connections that I had and the need that came up with in conversations.
Right. That's really interesting. What is and it's interesting that a lot of the work you do with leaders is focused on soft skills, like you said, communication, and what are some of those other soft skills that you train around?
Empathy, active listening. They're all related, right? You have to actively listen to empathize with people, but really, they're all about how you relate to yourself and how you relate to other people.
Yeah, and what is how are those things? How is leadership connected to the soft skills?
So a leader, people get typically, and this is one of the traps, I think, if you don't proactively do something as this happens, people typically get promoted because they're good at what they do.
Yeah.
They may or may not have soft skills to use to inspire their direct reports. They they have to be able to communicate well and listen well so that they can have their direct reports do what they need them to do, and then communicate that upwards to their own leadership.
Hmm. Right. So this actually dovetails into like what we what we really decided to hone in on this call, which is you hire someone, they have the technical skills, but you know, uh, the role that they're in is calling upon or demanding more than that. It's demanding um, the capacity to lead and inspire and manage others, to look kind of beyond the four corners of their job description and take a, proactive role in really in leadership, right? Um, so in in your experience, what is and like a client of mine just had this challenge in their VP of sales, and a who's a good at the technical dimensions of sales, that is good at managing accounts and um, keeping it, managing the accounts and keeping things moving, but um, uh, not good at looking beyond that, to the needs of the organization, to getting past his own status and things of that nature, and ultimately, client chose to let him go, and one of the things that we were talking about was like, what is the what are the options on the table when you have somebody that has the technical proficiency but really needs to grow as a person, to and to build and develop new capabilities, really, in order to grow into a bigger role. And so, what can you share about that, Scott, in terms of what 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 are the options?
Well, first, I feel for your client, because that is not a decision that they ever make lightly. And I think the traditional, not everyone sees it this way, but the traditional paradigm is, they stay as they are, or we have to terminate them.
Right.
As you're asking, there are other options. Um, for one thing, it's important for the top leadership, the CEO, the owner, president, to themselves know or learn how to communicate with someone like that, to find out what that person needs in order to grow into the role that the CEO or leader wants the other person to grow into. And then they can decide, is there some kind of coaching that they could use? Are they close, but they just need someone to help guide them a little bit? Do they need a set of training, in order to, are there just some skills that they need to communicate better, to work with people better, to inspire more? Or do their direct reports need some kind of training? The only way to know what the correct prescription is, either one of those things or a combination thereof, really have to find out what's missing from that person. Not what's missing from them, but what's missing from their actions in the role. And one really good way to, it's good information to have, is any assessment tool. We use the predictive index, implement it with our clients, but it's not the only one. Having that kind of insight into a person's innate drives and needs, super important. Maybe that person is the kind of person who needs to reflect on their own. So when they're dealing with other people, they don't talk things out well. Having that awareness themselves, they can then know how to grow into their role better in inspiring their direct reports.
So that's really interesting. So, so what I'm hearing you saying is that the leader um, needs to have the sort of wherewithal to be able to engage in this engage with the let's call it the manager at a level where you're drawing out where that manager is coming from, what that manager needs, how the manager perceives his circumstances, in order to understand what the manager needs to grow in the way that the founder wants the manager to grow.
Right. And let me just be clear. There's no blame in what I'm saying about the top leadership. It's some people already know this. We don't grow up being given the skills as kids. Most of us don't. I sure wasn't.
Right.
In school, learning how to communicate, talk about needs, talk about emotions.
Right.
We're not taught emotional intelligence as kids, and I think there's a little drive to do that now in schools, but it's certainly not very common now, and it was unheard of when I was in school as a kid. So no blame at all, but that is, there are intermediate steps between the keep the person and keep the problems the way they are, and terminate the person. There's a quite a wide range in between.
Yeah, that's that I appreciate that, and I also appreciate the challenge of like when you're kind of working with somebody, and without even being aware of it, we all bring expectations as to what a performer should be doing and should be capable of doing, um, like a founder may have a whole bunch of that going on when they're um, evaluating performance, and it might seem like almost obvious that the manager ought to be capable of, or performing consistent with your own expectations, right? And part of what I'm hearing you saying is, well, if they're not meeting your expectations, there's probably a reason for it, and it's incumbent upon us as leaders to figure out what's going on, what the needs are, how I as a leader can help my direct reports become leaders. So there may be some um, so part of that is maybe resources that they need, training, support, on a very practical level. Part of it might be helping them to become more aware through some of these assessment tools, right? Is that another piece of the puzzle?
It's helpful, but I have to say it's always helpful, but it's not always a requirement. In other words, sometimes if top leadership just has a conversation, just reaches out for help and has a conversation with a consultant, you may not end up having to spend that much money to have just a conversation or two about, if you're close enough and just need a little guidance in the right direction. um, you may not need to take big steps like implementing a system, or having people take time away from their normal work to do training. Sometimes that is the best step, and sometimes it's not necessary.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, in your experience, do people like know what they need? Are they reliable? Sort of, are they reliable kind of reporters of here's what I need in order to develop? I mean, do people know that about themselves, and or
Sometimes.
uh-huh.
I think it's easy, and I'm no exception to this. It's easy to put blame outward, right? And we, including myself, we assume that other people process information and see things the same way we do. and even that they have the same information we do, when that's not necessarily the case. But sometimes we've been brought in to do training, and only after the employee engagement survey that we do at the very beginning do we find out there's a lot more going on, and the perception by the workforce is quite different than the perception that the CFO had about what the actual issues are. Now, CFO's not wrong, and the people aren't wrong. It's all perception is reality when it comes to how you do things in the workplace, or really anywhere, but since we're talking about workplace.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, because I could see situations where a performer would say, like, here's all the stuff that I need in order to do my job better. But if um, and he or she's kind of pointing outside to all the deficiencies all around, all around him or her, right? But really, what's needed is an internal change in the way that they're seeing their role or their themselves, and or they're having a sort of more of a victim orientation rather than a proactive orientation. And in terms of those sort of fundamental internal shifts, do you see that happening?
When someone's willing, and that always has to be present, the willingness to change. So if someone, even if they feel victimized by circumstance or by people in their workplace, if they have the willingness to look at themselves or even just to grow and learn, there's so much possibility in changes. Another thing, though, another factor in all of this is sometimes people kind of fell into what they're doing, and it really isn't what they enjoy. It's not what they are naturally good at or even interested in.
Right.
And that's, I know from experience, I left IT consulting when I realized that I was terribly unhappy. That's why I didn't want to spend an extra second there. Now, someone could have tried to manage me, and I think a couple times that did happen. Like, hey, we need, you to put in a little more extra time and a little extra effort. But if I were to look at my profile, my behavioral profile at the time, I would have seen that the alignment was not there. And people can only go for so long doing something that's just the opposite of their needs. For example, if you're really extroverted, doing data analysis, you're just not going to last. You can try to manage the person by, giving them a more dynamic environment, but over time, they're going to be doing too much solo work and won't be happy.
Right, right. So there's got to be this kind of growth mindset, like this willingness to grow and learn, but also an intrinsic sort of, motivation to do so. It comes
Right.
from there being a good fit, like they're happy about the direction they're moving in. That makes sense. So let's say I'm a founder and I have um, a performer that I really need and want to grow into more of a leadership role, either because it's necessary, and the costs of finding a replacement and time and money and so forth are so extreme. So tell me about what that process would look like, if you were, to come in and help in that situation. And then also, how do you make, a lot of, I think a lot of founders, a lot of leaders are facing the choice of, do I invest in the training or do I just cut my losses, rip the band-aid off, and, and just look for a better fit? And, how do you know how to navigate that? Just, when is training a worthwhile investment? When does it make sense to rip the band-aid off and just, start fresh?
Well, there are two questions in there, and I'll address the first one first, and that is the first and foremost thing to do when you have someone that you want to continue to grow in leadership is to have the conversation with them. See if they're aligned, if what they want is aligned with that. Do they want to grow, and why? So a lot of people think, yeah, you're supposed to, that's a good next step in my career. But is that really what they want to do there in that field, in that company? And you have to ask some hard questions, but really be open to the answers, not try to listen for what you want, which is for that person to stay. Because, yeah, it's so expensive to get a new person, to bring them up to speed. And if they stay, then they start producing for you after a period of months or whatever it is. If you can keep that same person, of course, that's the best. But it's not going to work out long term anyway if that's not what they want to do, or if that's not what they have the skills to do. But as we've been talking about, if they have the desire, then you can start looking at prescriptions for that growth, like coaching, like training, what kind of training would suit them, and maybe even having that be part of the conversation. Okay, you do have the willingness, so what do you need from me in order to, grow and get the skills? And that conversation, it's difficult to do this, but to say, okay, you have the willingness, good, here's what I need from you. So far, this is not where we'd like it to be. How do you think you can get there? Do you want to get there? And then what do you need from me to get there? And then maybe it is training. Again, training sometimes is difficult because in our experience, I haven't gone into any company and had them say, yeah, we've got a bunch of free time just kind of sitting around. They have to disrupt what they're doing in order to take that time out for training. And it's not easy, but at some point, the calculation has to be pointed in that direction, that the benefit will be so much greater than the time, the 3 hours here or 4 hours here or there, to grow those skills. And the training, you have to make sure it's the right kind of training too. Some training or a workshop, you go and you take notes and then you come away going, oh, that's great. And then you see your notes a month later and go, oh yeah, I was supposed to do these new skills. Right. If you don't have an action plan or some kind of follow-up, either with the trainer or training company or internally, you can set up these things internally as well so that you're not always paying consultants to do everything. Yeah. That is, that's part of the calculation. You want it to be effective. You have to make sure it's effective. If you're going to take the time to do it and spend the money to do it, make sure that things are in place to track how the benefit is working in your company.
Yeah, and what about the kind of hire, fire, train decision, or the Band-Aid decision? What's your experience around that?
That's a tougher one. Although I have to say, I don't think people make firing decisions lightly. I think I've seen more of, holding on to someone that is affecting other people negatively, because it's a hard decision to make.
Yeah, there is a lot of sort of conventional wisdom I find in the startup world around and business world about hiring, like hire slowly, fire quickly, kind of a thing. Like, and I'm curious about where you land on that question.
I would say it's important to hire intentionally. Mm-hmm. Structured interview, great. Make sure that their past experience is what you want, but also the behavioral, knowing what that their needs are going to be met by that position. If you hire slowly, I get what that really means. It's hire when you absolutely have to, because and
also choose wisely.
Yeah, absolutely. So you don't have to fire quickly. I mean, you're right. That's kind of a newer paradigm. That's not the traditional paradigm. Mm-hmm. A lot of people still do have trouble letting go of people because they've got their own stuff going. They've got their own work going on in addition to managing a difficult personality who's a leader in the company, or all the other stuff. So that decision,
Yeah, it
um,
can be pretty unpleasant in a lot of different ways, and it's the question is, and I think it's yeah. I mean, I mean, I see a lot of my clients wrestling with that question. Invest more or cut your losses in a sense.
it's a tough decision to make.
Yeah. But I think from what you've partly answered it in my mind with the when you have somebody that is willing, uh, interested, and eager to grow, and is showing that kind of capacity to and humility necessary to learn, grow, and stretch into new capabilities. That's kind of a pointer. It's sort of a hopeful thing to be observing, right?
Yeah, and it's definitely, it's such a necessary conversation to have, rather than, hey, stop yelling at people, stop doing this and that. It's bigger picture. Hey, is this aligned for you? Is this what you want to be doing? What's not working for you? What can I do to support you? And you
Yeah.
know, where do
Yeah.
we go from here?
Right. But on the other hand, if you got somebody that doesn't see the problem as lying within their own capabilities or their own, in other words, like there's nothing, the problem's not here, it's with you and the organization, and uh, that might be a more difficult person to train up and
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, well, and that's a person who doesn't have the willingness. If that's their outlook, that conversation is going to let you know, are they open to change? Are they even capable of changing with their current mindset? If the answer is no, then yeah, then you have to make the choice. Do you want to lose them or other people in your organization?
Yeah, yeah, totally. Wow. Okay. Look, Scott, I found this conversation incredibly helpful.
Oh, great.
No, it's a really nice and succinct, I think, framework or summary of this really specific challenge. So there's tons more that we can say about this, I'm sure, but why don't we tie it up here? And thank you so much for spending the time. And um, we should talk about whether there's more topics like this that you think would be helpful to founders.
Sure. Sounds good, Francesco. Thanks.
Thanks much, Scott.
All
Talk
right.
to you soon.